Okay, it looks
For the
like we're
Select
online
Committee
now.
on School Facilities, March 8th. Senator Hutchings,
Excused?
Senator Cost,
Here.
Senator Landon,
He's in another meeting.
Oh, Senator Landon, I'm looking at you.
Yeah.
Excused?
Senator Rothfuss,
Here.
Representative Banks,
Excused.
Representative Harshman,
Here.
Representative Jennings,
Excused.
Representative Walters,
Here.
Vice Chairman Brown,
Here.
Chairman Pappas.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, welcome everyone. Big crowd out there. So today we're meeting to discuss interim topics for the upcoming interim. I'll pass it over to staff to lead us through this conversation.
Mr. Chairman, Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office. I did send out an email yesterday to the committee members with a list of those items that you're charged to complete by statute. As I mentioned in the past years, the list has consisted of just that, your statutory duties from Title 28 and from Title 21. We did receive a couple of requests for interim topics. The first is major maintenance, including,
Tanya, is your mic on?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
These rooms are not as good as the
Maybe you
ones
just need to get
downstairs.
closer. Yeah, thank you.
Including, is that better?
Yeah.
Including major maintenance and the expenditure of those funds on enhancements, and whether the percentage for major maintenance is the appropriate amount. In addition, we received an email from Vice Chairman Brown, and that reads as follows. For the ability of districts to come to the department for renovations that are not currently addressed in statute. And then the second item that he listed was setting the design and construction budgets as one and the same to allow for quick movement as needed for districts and to save state dollars. Those are the requests that I've received thus far.
Okay. If you recall, committee, at one time I had mentioned that someday we should probably tackle visiting all the laws that we've passed concerning the School Facilities Commission and School Facilities Department. Some of them have actually hampered the department and the commission and put a lot of strings and a lot of requirements on our department that maybe are not necessary anymore. So I think that's probably a Herculean effort, and so that maybe we take those as pieces as we go. So rather than an interim topic, I think we all just need to think about, you know, how we can streamline the process. And I've spoken with certainly Director Vincent about that, and told him initially when he first hit the ground last May or whenever it was, that start looking at those issues and providing us feedback as well so that we can assist him in carrying out his mission easier. So anyhow, so committee, can we hit, oh, yes, Tanya?
Mr. Chairman, just two quick notes. You'll recall that there's an appropriation for the statewide assessment, and that will take place this year, and I believe that passed. And then secondly, the prioritized list that you'll receive will be something completely new under the revised rules and regulations. So also something to keep in mind as you prepare for the interim.
Yes, we'll be visiting both of those issues, I'm sure. Okay, so committee, can we have some discussion on the topics? Any thoughts? Yeah, yeah.
Well, the major maintenance
Mr. Chairman, yeah, the major maintenance, it's every year it's the consultants say we should be doing a little more than we really are. And then it gets further devalued by the fact that we take out 10% of that, then can go towards safety issues as well as it can be used for the entire facility, not just the buildings. So it could be increased, but it seems to be working at this time. I think the bigger question is really, in my mind, is how is routine maintenance being done prior to the request for major maintenance dollars and component level funding?
Okay, well, I had asked, since Senator Cost also had seconded your motion on that at the October meeting, I asked him to actually draft up some thoughts on it. So Senator Cost, do you want to, and he just passed out a little blurb that he typed up, basically on that same issue. So Senator
Okay.
Cost, why don't you tell us what your thoughts are?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is just a short blurb too. What I really wanted to look at was how the 15% came about and why it came about, and then just kind of get some background towards it so that we could look at, I struggle with us taking state funds to pay for enhancements. I don't have any problem with enhancements. And I certainly welcome any school district that wants to take on those enhancements. But at the same time, I think the responsibility of the maintenance probably should be the school districts as well, rather than the state. And so maybe that money needs to go more towards the maintenance of the state stuff rather than the enhancements. And that was my thought. And I just thought it'd be nice to dig into that and see where that takes us. So.
Okay, the Senator Archman, or Representative Archman.
I think it's 10%. And that came, I think, in '03 or '04. No, yeah, '03 or '04, when we were kind of starting to build this airplane, you know, while we were flying it. And it was a House member, I think Stan Cooper, who later went and served in the Senate, I think, amended that statute as coming through 10%. And really, most of the enhancements, what are enhancements? Most of them are existing buildings that have more square foot than what the state would build now. And you only, you know, and I don't know, we ratcheted that down over the years, but the square footage, we give a little allotment for that. But I think it'd be good to dig into just how major maintenance is calculated, kind of re-educate ourselves. But it started at like 125%, and it worked its way down. What is it now, 110%?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, Matt Wilmarth, so the allowable gross square footage for educational square footage is the lesser of actual gross square footage, and it started at 135%, ratcheted down to 125, and now it's stable at 115%.
Yeah.
So they are, for educational square footage, is provided the lesser of that amount. For office and warehouse, it looks at the total percentage of that in proportion to the educational allowable square footage. And it's a little bit more complex because it provides a certain percent based upon if it's 90% or 100% in proportion of your educational square footage. And we can certainly review that with the committee this interim.
I think it's good just to learn about. I don't think we've talked about it in 5 or 6 years, you know, but I do think, I mean, when we go full circle around to this, we'll realize it's pretty good policy we got, because a lot of the enhancement is really, it's more roof space. And when you do the roof on a new school, you're not going to say, oh, that's enhancement, I'm going to stop 15 feet from the edge. And so that's really where most of that is. So it's, you know, yeah, I think some of us think enhancements are, you know, some kind of really nice, exorbitant kind of facility that was added. Most of it is simply just more square feet than the number of students you have. And because we know our communities are moving up and down population based a lot of times on the price of commodities. And that's what drives it, is your kids drive the allowable square footage. And then that in turn drives the dollars for major maintenance.
Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah, on that topic, contemplating enhancements, so look at our high school as a good example where we bonded to provide a lot of enhancement and everybody thinks, well, that's the pool. It is the pool as part of the enhancement, but it's also an entire suite of science labs where the enhancement was to increase the square footage so that you have more room and capacity for science, that you have better equipment. We spent millions of dollars on that, increased the space of our auditorium so it became a community center auditorium. It's used for lots of purposes as opposed to just a, you know, what is currently provided for in the model for funding is going to be a more modest auditorium, obviously, than what we have. A commons area that can expand dramatically, that increase the square footage, but again, all of these things you have to maintain, you have to have major maintenance for. And then obviously for us, we did put in funding for ongoing maintenance requirements for the pool. But there's a lot that goes into enhancements that aren't simply, all right, well, we bought a new track or we bought a new pool. There's a lot more possibilities than that. And most of ours were that educational programming side of things.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts on this particular item? If not, what about some of the other items that we've discussed? Let's discuss them here in committee before I go to public comment.
I just, Mr. Chairman, on this major maintenance, I guess I would like to, and you know, you'll decide as chairman, but more just a broader kind of learning thing. And as we learn, you know, I think if you say, well, I just want to focus on this 10% for enhancements, there's a whole bigger issue, I think, and it's really fascinating. I think it'd be good for all of us to review that whole process of major maintenance. So.
Yeah, I believe it's, you know, Senator Costa wants to look at the entire procedure on how we develop that number. So I think we're looking at a 30,000-foot view of it. So I think you're right. So,
Mr. Chairman.
yes.
Mr. Chairman, I would add to that because I think it really starts down at the routine maintenance level and statewide tracking of what the routine maintenance is going on. Because if routine maintenance isn't taking place, then it turns into major maintenance, it turns into component level projects. And so I think maintenance in general from the start to finish is really how broad we ought to make this kind of a topic. And then as the interim works through, we can narrow it down as we see fit or at least have a better understanding of how all of that works together. And the routine maintenance is really part of their block funding model, but if they neglect it and then come to the state for the money to fix it, we don't like that any better than other alternatives.
Great. Yes, Senator Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And really, through the process, I think the learning is going to be great for us all to have a better update on it. But I think also maybe there's going to be a need to tweak some things this here or there a little bit. I'm not out to get after anybody. I'm out to learn what's going on and then maybe work from there to, do we need to consider tweaks? Are we doing the routine maintenance that keeps the major maintenance from becoming an issue? So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, do you want to talk about the other item that?
Mr. Chairman, these were certainly topics that came to us, you know, after the October meeting of last year, and I think it even says that in number 1 there. You have to see our discussion after October 10th. Mm-hmm. We've clearly seen that districts come to the department for needs here and they just don't fit the current statute. And so then they're basically turned away at the door and said, you know, no, we're not going to address that. So I'd like to see maybe what we can do about discussing that. I don't know that we need to see any major changes immediately on it, but I do think that having a discussion between some of the school districts that are facing those issues and the department in front of the committee would probably be helpful for us. And then looking at what we had to do this year, and I think we had 2, maybe 3 different budgets that were pushed forward that their construction line didn't quite add up to exactly what we were looking at. And in an effort to try to square that up, you know, we pushed them forward underneath amendments. And we kind of have to rely on getting the body's support for some amendments in that unless we do it in committee with appropriations. And then even that, you have to get a standing committee amendment. And I just don't think that that's the right way to do business. If we've got a school that is ready to go and we know that, you know, phase 2's coming up and it's just going to be a month difference from us coming out of session, we should be looking at what we can do to prioritize making sure that those do not get delayed. Those types of issues across the state, you know, are really what hinder what we're doing. So those are my 2 issues that I saw last interim that I think we can address. I don't think they take a ton of time, but I certainly do think that they're worthy of discussion.
Committee, any thoughts on renovation as addressed in the statutes? This first item.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree. I think that's a good idea, you know, really, as we don't have as much revenue as we did in years past, the ability to remodel schools versus full-on new construction and generate some cost savings when we know the need is there, but instead of scrapping it all and starting over, I think there's some real cost savings to be had, and so I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Okay. And I think the other issue about quick movement on the timeline of things is something I actually pushed when I was a designer. You know, so many times we've always lost our construction season because the legislature's inability to move quickly. And so I think we ought to probably look at that entire process, how we authorize the funding and when we do for projects that are, you know we're going to be built. So I think we can look at that as well. Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah, on that, we've obviously had a lot better luck over the years where we combine the phase 2 design into the construction so that you have continuity between those two. And at that point, as you're finalizing the design, you just roll directly into construction as the season opens. And whenever we separate those in the budget, that's when we wrap ourselves around the axle and waste a year. So maybe we need to start really positioning things that way.
And so, committee, I've always, in the past, have always been a proponent of allowing a level 1 process, but typically we will put a level 1 and level 2 together and then separate a level 3. Dollar-wise, it makes sense to do that, but construction schedule-wise, and it's really completely opposite thinking. And so I've maintained that level 1 ought to be separate, and then level 2 and 3 ought to be together. The issue comes about on what delivery process is used. So I think it would, if it's design bid build, if it's a CRMA, if it's a what do you call that, a design build. There's a lot of different methods out there, and I've discussed a lot of them with the director. In fact, he actually mentioned it in his confirmation hearings about the ability to use a different delivery method depending on the project, depending on the timeline, and depending on the available funding. So I agree with you. It'll change probably with each method, but I think we need to go there, discuss it in the interim. Yes,
Well, I think maybe broadening that to not just the budget timeline, but as you were saying, the method of project management and delivery is something else that we could look at. We don't necessarily do this efficiently, and again, I think back to the Laramie High School example where the timeline led to something like $10 million in extra bid. And what we ended up doing then, it was, Senator Nicholas and I kind of went to the school board and said, we want to reject the bid. because this is absurd. This is too much. Go back and bid it again, and do it on with a relaxed timeline, and then we save $10 million on that project for the same outcome. Those are the kinds of things that we get ourselves caught in the process, and the process constrains us and costs us, and maybe we need to be thinking outside the box and do it better. We have all sorts of statutory requirements that probably hold us back from optimizing this process in a way that gets us higher quality for lower cost if we're just a little more thoughtful. Steve?
Representative Harshman.
I think it's a good point, Senators, and I think part of this, with this volatility, I think districts, once they get appropriated, they get scared that, geez, I gotta hurry up and do this, or the legislature next session will take it away from me. And we've seen, whether it's an auditorium or, I know in my school district, 10 years ago, okay, I have to go to revenue to hear Bill, but I thought one other thing, if we have a meeting in Casper, the Wyoming School for the Deaf, and it is a very unique situation on the title, who owns the land, this public school it's hooked next to, adjoined to, shared maintenance issues. I don't know enough about it. I just think we ought to all probably dig into that, because that's going to be one of those kind of unique, it's like the university lab school, it's not like you have 10 of these. We got one of them, and we got some work to do on that issue, so.
Well, I certainly agree, and in fact, I've asked staff this, for this interim, that every place we meet, I'd like to see us tour a school facility. So we're going to meet twice in Cheyenne and once in Casper, so let's think about what we want to do in Casper for you or there. I think. Okay. And so I've asked for Cheyenne that we go to one of the schools that really is hurting, needs replacement, and we need to look at an old school, and then also the latest school. So we'll have two meetings. We'll go to Cary, and when we talked about the cost associated with what we do, if you recall, Cary was pulled funding on that, and while it wasn't extended, wasn't increased the next year, what happened is we had to redesign the school and drop some square footage in order to make the budget. And then because it didn't go out to bid till October, we built through 2 winter seasons. That costs, we had a change order of $750,000 for winter construction. I mean, those are things we don't have to do if we're smart about how we allow these projects to go forward. So I think it's a good topic.
Mr. Chairman, I'd say the last thing on it, and this is certainly a really overarching goal, but this committee really, we discussed, even as Tanya brought forward, we're going to see a different list of what's going to be coming forward to us, and it attempts to remove politics, away from it in general. And so I think that that's what we need to continue to work towards is removing the personalities and removing the locations away from it as much as possible, because at this point, it's our job is not to determine whether or not Lander really needs a school. If the numbers say that Lander needs a school, then we build the school. Or we refurbish it, as we've said, and we look at what we can do to do this. But we have really got to focus as this committee, in my opinion. We need to worry about taking politics out of the decisions, stop placing, pet projects above everything else, and we really need to start looking at what it is that really needs to be done across us. And so, Mr. Chairman, I look at us having really 2 interim ways of doing this. I see us having a statutory obligation, doing what our statutory maintenance or statutory work is, and then I see us having basically 3 ranked items, 4 if we want to take on Representative Harshman's, but we've got Representative Walter and Senator Cost's major maintenance discussion, and then the 2 items that I brought forward, such as the renovation and quick movement. And I actually think opening that up, as Senator Rothfuss said, is probably the smarter way to go. A much larger picture, what is our deliverable, and work with the staff to determine whether or not what we're looking at is the correct way to go. And ultimately, like you say, with Cary Junior High, we cost ourselves, and that was politics in general. So I think we're pretty well set in my opinion. I don't know if anybody else has got anything else that they'd like to discuss, but I feel like that's a pretty full plate.
Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have anything else, but I do think that with the renovation, we need to look at how does that parallel with new build, and how can we best come up with solutions for both, because I think renovation in a lot of cases is a worthy way of moving forward, rather than saying, let's tear this down. If it's got the proper structure to where we can go ahead and renovate it, it makes sense to try to go through that. And so I do think, looking at that, looking at the possibility of, do we need to put some guidelines or sideboards on how you look at both or whatever, I don't know, but.
Well, that's the age-old dilemma. Certainly, I've always dealt with it with all the clients that I've had in my professional practice, is at what point do you decide it's more economically feasible to replace than to refurbish and remodel? So that's what, we'll lean on our department to bring us that kind of advice, and hopefully we'll heed it and not make it political. But that is an age-old dilemma, at what point? At some point, they all have to be replaced, at some point. So, okay, any further out of those three? I'm assuming, committee, you're good with the 4 items that we typically bring every year? I think there's 4, aren't there? Yeah. Those, I think, we'll maintain those, right? And then these new items? Are there any other items we want to think about? Okay. All right. At this time, I'll open it for public comment. If anybody wants to comment? No? Is there anybody online? No? Okay, well, that's great. Public comment is.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just restate those back to you,
Oh,
those
yes.
3.
I was going to have you do that here in a second, after I close
okay.
public comment, which is now closed.
Major maintenance calculation, including the 10% allowable expenditures for enhancement, the appropriate percentage for replacement value, and implications of routine maintenance. That's the first item. The second is an overview of facility planning and the budget process, including renovation requests and any cost savings that may be realized as a result of renovating in comparison to a new build, and explore the benefits of appropriating for design and construction in a single line item. That's the second item.
Okay.
And then the final item is review project management and construction delivery methods and potential cost savings that may be realized.
Yeah, that's pretty broad, and that's exactly what we want. Sound good to you, committee? Okay.
And then in that process, of course, we'll review the statutes as you requested that apply to each of those areas.
Good. Okay. All right.
Great.
Any further thoughts?
When
Okay.
does management council meet for these? Do they have their meeting set yet?
Mr. Chairman, I believe it will be April 8th, I think, is the date that I've heard.
Are you planning on being there?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay.